Welcome to the Fat Fueled Family Podcast, where every week Danny and Maura Vega discuss topics that help families live a healthy and active lifestyle with their little ones, including nutrition and training, peaceful parenting, education, and mindset. To stay up to date, make sure to hit subscribe on this podcast and check out the blog at www.fatfueled.family. You can also find them on Facebook and Instagram at dannyvega.ms, at fatfueledmom, and at fatfueledkids, and Fat Fueled Family on YouTube. Enjoy the show.
What's that?
Oh, this?
Yeah.
It's just my Keto Brick.
Keto Brick? What's a Keto Brick?
Well, Keto Brick, it's an actual brick, which is awesome because it lasts me a really long time. Can't say the same for you.
Nope.
But Keto Brick is an awesome keto-friendly snack that it could be used so many ways, you guys, seriously. But it is keto-friendly, high-fat, low-carb, has really, really good macros. It's shelf-stable, which I love because I like to take it with me when I leave the house with the kids. And it's got no sweeteners, none of the crap that we're usually staying away from. So no allulose, erythritol, corn fiber, soy, any of that stuff that we're usually avoiding, but it makes such a great snack. I also love it just as a treat. I like to put it in my coffee and the kids love it. So that's a plus.
I totally agree. And I have one of these every single day.
An entire brick.
Yeah, everybody knows I like to crush mine up into cereal and have it like a cereal. My current favorite flavors are peanut butter and chocolate peanut butter cup, which we have right here next to us. What about you?
I really love the peanut butter because it's nice and smooth, but my other favorite flavor would probably be toasted coconut.
Yeah, toasted almond coconut is amazing. And yeah, of course, as you all know, we are great friends with the owners of this company, Robert Sykes and Crystal Sykes. And both of them, when this started, they were just wrapping these things up in aluminum foil and shipping them out themselves, pulling all-nighters. And here we are several years later. It's an amazing company, guys. They have vegan options, vegan-friendly options, as well as whey options. So the two flavors that I mentioned are chocolate peanut butter cup and peanut butter. And the chocolate peanut butter cup is whey, and the peanut butter is with the pea protein. So if you don't tolerate whey, no worries. Or if you're on a vegan diet, no worries. You can have the peanut butter. So guys, click on the link in the description of this podcast episode and check out the Keto Bricks ASAP. It gets the Fat Fuel family seal of approval. Anything else?
No, that's it. It makes a really great snack. A little trick, I will just give one last tip, is if you want to melt it down, I like to melt it down and put it in little molds to make it just bite sizes for the kids because it's a brick.
It is a brick. Get your Keto Bricks.
Do it.
Welcome to the Fat Fuel Family Podcast. I'm your host, Danny Vega, and I'm joined by my very busy wife, Maura. How are you, my love?
I'm good.
All right, we had some technical difficulties, so we don't want to take any time. So let's first get into introducing our guest who we've been wanting to have on forever. This week's guest is a leader, teacher, and coach serving people in need of oxalate-aware eating and support for healing chronic health conditions naturally. Throughout her career in public health, she has been lucky to work in many different settings with a wide diversity of people and organizations. She provides nutritional guidance to individuals, business, community organizations, and professional associations who are seeking concrete solutions to specific health concerns. Sally loves to deliver seminars and lectures on nutrition, wellness, and other health topics, specializing in seminars on the low-oxalate diet for pain and functional disorders. She also offers seminars on a variety of health and lifestyle topics. Sally's credentials include a master's degree in public health leadership from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, a Bachelor of Science degree in nutrition science from Cornell University, and experience in health research and education in medical schools and communities. If you're in the medical field, either in clinical care or research, Sally can work with you in expanding the science and application of oxalate-aware eating for pain relief and much more. I'd like to introduce you guys to my new best friend, Sally K. Norton. How are you, Sally?
I'm great.
Sally.
It's great to be with you guys. Very
Thank
excited.
you so much for coming on.
Yeah, it's great to have you.
Awesome. Well, we're super excited to get into this conversation. So let's get started. We always lead with the question, what is the most critical problem you are currently trying to solve?
I am living the question of how to bring this message forward that is so foreign to everyone and help them catch the piece that they need to benefit from it so that they can see the relevance of that. And so that's a perpetual space I'm living in. And right now that looks like how do I finish my book manuscript? And right after that, it's going to look like, how do I find a video editor to help me edit some testimonial videos? And it continues forward because there's a lot of work to do to bring out some information that people are a little bit resistant to because it's not fitting what we already know. And as human beings love to stick with what we know.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, by the way, we have someone that can help you with the video.
Oh, I'm in love with you guys.
Yeah. So yeah, Sally, you know, one of the things we spoke about on the phone earlier was how so many people, you know, they're trying to get their health in order and they try these different diets. They do things like paleo and keto, but they fail to recognize like the impact of oxalates in their diet. So I think now is a good time to just do a quick review of what oxalates are and how they can impact people's health. Because I think the only thing people think about is really like kidney stones. But like, as you've mentioned, there's so much more.
Yeah, there's more.
Well, even people who recognize the connection between oxalate and the food we're eating and getting kidney stones are really not getting it at the level they need to get it. So oxalate is a natural compound found throughout nature, and plants love to make this stuff. It's very useful for plants. They have to use it for many different purposes, for their own survival, their own reproduction. They make a lot of it. And so we have been not paying attention to plants, especially the ones that are good at it. And the ones that are really good at it are now very popular and have like their own street on Wall Street. I mean, they're like so pushed as if they have, you know, publicists or something. Kale was big a while ago, and that's actually not a high oxalate food. But spinach is perpetually, since Popeye days, which has been over 100 years now, spinach has been this like symbol of good eating. And it turns out it's a symbol of toxic eating. It's a symbol of driving yourself into the ground. Unfortunately, no one sees that. And once people do know that spinach is a problem, they say, oh, you can't have anything leafy green. That must be a terrible diet. Well, no, there's only 4 greens that are high in oxalate. And the rest of them, especially all the ones in the cabbage family, are not. So oxalate is this plant chemical. We're sort of vaguely aware of it. There is lots of research on it for the last 200 years, but it's really been dropped. It's been dropped from medicine. It's been dropped from public health and nutrition, really never picked it up. And so in the meantime, we've got a lot of trends about what we should and shouldn't be eating that happens to be picking up on very high oxalate foods. And we've entered an era where we're overdoing oxalate and poisoning ourselves, literally poisoning ourselves on a plant chemical that is intended to poison you. And we're doing it early in life, during pregnancy and childhood, because we're doing things like these spinach green smoothies and things full of almonds, nuts and almonds especially, cashews and peanuts, very high in oxalate. And then you can start living on keto bread and spinach smoothies and dark chocolate, which is another one of these sort of superfood kind of things that is really high in oxalate and very bioavailable, which means it can get from the food into your bloodstream quite easily.
Oh, man.
Yeah. I mean, I think about just like, you know, I look at some of these like sample keto plan, you know, and it's like you see one day it's got all of these, because I've printed out your lists. I've gone to your website and I've looked at them, and it's like, wow, we are not aware of all the things that have these high oxalate foods. And it is kind of odd that you're like the only one, you know, but we're used to being like the only ones with a lot of stuff. So we got your back. I mean, I will say like there is this one thing that I eat that's high oxalate, but other than that, it's all meat. But
you have room, because with oxalates, it's not like a tiny bit hurts you. It's because we are eating way more than our system can handle, which isn't that much. Our system is designed for very little. But, you know, on a meat-based diet, there's room for things that technically are high oxalate in really modest amounts and not at every meal.
Gotcha.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. So in the last decade or so, you know, more and more people have been becoming aware of various phytochemicals in plant foods that can lead to inflammation and rob us of absorbing minerals. We know that with things like lectins and phytic acid, we can prepare these foods a certain way to minimize exposure, but that doesn't seem to be the case with oxalates. Are there any factors, you know, beyond the amount of oxalates in the food that would make one type of oxalate less damaging than others?
There's factors in the foods and there's factors in the person. And the probably most scary factor is the person, because once you have leaky gut, which is very common if you have any kind of metabolic distress or inflammation, obesity, if you've had bariatric surgery, any of that, the leaky gut thing can take the normal transfer from the food in the digestive tract into the blood. That sort of absorption process can go from a norm of like 10 to 15% of what you're eating up to like 60 or 70% because you've got leaky gut. So if you got some kind of disease condition, even an invisible one, or obesity, you're already in trouble with oxalate bioavailability going sky high and crazy. Because our tolerance for oxalate exists because the body is aware of this chemical and even produces a little bit. We produce 10 or 12 milligrams a day of oxalate from just turnover of connective tissue. But if you've had an injury or surgery, you're going to have more connective tissue turnover and produce more. But even the bigger fragment or, kind of proportion of what the body makes of that 12 milligrams, 10 of them are coming from vitamin C breakdown. So people on megadosing C supplements are making a lot more, not really making, but more oxalate is being generated in their body from vitamin C supplements. So even just, I love dark chocolate and I take a lot of vitamin C and I have a little bit of a obesity or leaky gut problem is enough to end up being toxic with oxalate, which you don't necessarily get to know that because of the symptoms come way late in the game. But to get back to the food piece, sprouting might make it worse, and cooking doesn't do a thing because heat doesn't do anything. Now, if you boil certain foods that are medium oxalate, like broccoli, and you use water submergent cooking, and you cook it pretty hard, some of the oxalic acid ions that will dissolve into the water, and you can reduce, like broccoli, I recommend you boil it so that you're not getting 10 or 15 milligrams, but you're getting like 6 milligrams in your portion of broccoli. So that's where it works, but it doesn't work in terms of baking, roasting, or even steaming. It doesn't really help. And you can't break down these crystals that they make because the oxalate starts as oxalic acid, then it becomes these crystals, and plants deliberately build these crystals of calcium oxalate. And calcium oxalate is so hard and durable. You have to think of it as like uber microscopic quartz dust or glass shreds. So this stuff is so tough, it lasts like 50,000 years in archaeological digs. They'll dig camps where humans were, and they'll dig up these little oxalate crystals to figure out what plants they were working with in that time period.
Wow. I will say, when you look at it just from like just an aesthetic thing, it's beautiful. But not in my body.
Yeah.
Well, and it doesn't, the crystals just get in your mouth and your digestive tract, and they're very oxidative and damaging. And if they can get anywhere near your cells, they're going to be like sandpaper, abrading and taxing your digestive tract. And that's enough. Just the electromagnetic effects on cell membranes can be enough to cause cells to start losing electrolytes and losing mitochondria and losing control over their ions, which then makes something like a nerve cell or a muscle cell not function well. And so it can contribute to things like IBS because the coordination of your peristalsis and your rectal function and defecation require those muscles and nerves to work. So it's very common. At least 60% of people who have too much oxalate in their body have some kind of digestive issue. And then if you have a digestive issue, you're going to absorb more and you're going to develop an oxalate problem. So it's this kind of chicken and egg cycle, right?
So you would, one thing to suspect with someone with like a slow moving bowel, or what is it that Crystal has? Gastroparesis. Would oxalates possibly be a contributor to that?
Yeah. Right.
And then, like you said, you would absorb more.
And motility disorders, whether they be a kind of obstruction, like kind of stop working. It's kind of like fibromyalgia of the gut, where the muscles are knotted and not working properly. But a lot of it is a neurological problem because of the oxalic acid. So the crystals are irritating the gut, but oxalic acid just breaks down to a little ion, and that is a 2-carbon molecule. That is really tiny. It's like bigger than water, but not much bigger. It's a really small molecule. And that oxalic ion somehow gets into cells. Ions generally are controlled by cells because cells have fatty membranes, but somehow oxalate pretty much enters cells when it wants to. And of course, cells have transporters for ions, and as it transporters for ions in and out of cells is like the revolving door on a big building, where you circle around. But the revolving door in this case, you need one partner outside the door and one inside the door, and it's an exchange process. So oxalate gets moved around in this ion exchange process in and out of cells. But as it gets from your food into your bloodstream, now it's right there with your blood plasma and your red blood cells and your white blood cells. And studies have shown that within 40 minutes of a green smoothie, your mitochondria and your white blood cells are damaged. That means your immune system is immediately damaged after you eat a high oxalate food. And the oxalate also connects on these enzymes because it looks like the substrate. So these enzymes that give you energy in your cells, they use pyruvate as a substrate. It's part of the Krebs cycle and so on. We won't get into chemistry, but the enzymes that produce ATP in cells get blocked by oxalate. So if there's a lot of it, you can start blocking energy production in red blood cells, and then the ion pumps stop working and the cells blow up because they get too much sodium and calcium stuck in the cell, and the pumps don't work because there's not enough energy to run the pumps, and there's not enough energy to run them because oxalate's blocking the ion. So you get these really basic problems way down at the cellular level where you're messing with membranes, mitochondria, mitochondrial enzymes. You're creating oxidative stress, and that oxidative stress and broken mitochondria creates inflammation. So that when the cells are suffering down there, the immune system says, "Oh, darlings, what's going on? Somebody's harming you." And the immune system comes in with its monocytes and leukocytes and tries to clean up the problem, and it's trying to beat up the problem. And that has collateral effects where you get into chronic inflammation. And eventually it trains your immune cells to start attacking stuff that is crystals and what we think of as autoimmunity. But what happens is when you have chronic cell damage, even though you don't see a lot of symptoms, you end up with chronic inflammation, which eventually leads to lots of metabolic breakdown problems that become chronic diseases of all kinds.
Wow. I just imagine that poor little that poor little cell, like it's been fighting for so long. It doesn't trust anything. It's like you're an enemy. I'm getting you too.
Yeah, this whole army of immune cells. I mean, the immune system starts becoming deranged because basically what happens with the oxalate is we're eating so much that not only are we immediately hurting those cells in the blood. In the blood, the blood, when it leaves your intestines, it goes straight to the liver for cleanup, right? So the liver takes out the vitamins and tries to filter out the stuff you shouldn't have, and these sinusoids in the liver are just like open cells that are accepting this stuff and doing really hard work, and they're getting 100% of the oxalate you're absorbing. So you can wear out your liver's ability to generate glutathione and deal with toxins when you're so busy the liver is very tolerant of this because it's got a lot of glutathione there, and potentially, the cells generate their own glutathione in the liver to protect themselves. But when they're constantly having to protect themselves from oxalate, there's not enough resources to protect you from nail polish and furniture junk and, shoe polish and all the chemicals we're surrounded with. So you could end up with chemical sensitivity after a while. So then your poor liver's working too hard. Then it goes from your liver to your heart. And it's only a few inches from your liver to your heart, right? And then it goes your lungs, and then it goes your heart. So 100% of what you're eating is going to your liver, your heart, and your lungs long before your body can get rid of it because the kidneys have to get rid of it. So in the meantime, you've got capillaries and other vascular tissues, arteries and veins, carrying toxic stuff all the time after your meals, for hours after meals. It takes a while for it to absorb. It takes a day for food to move through the intestinal tract. So you can see, constant incoming oxalate for many hours after a meal. So there's a lot of metabolic stress going on when we're eating a toxin like that. And it is toxic, but we're so wedded to once you learn the foods that have it, you think, well, that can't be true.
Yeah. You gotta, your heroes are getting shot down left and right. You're like, what? This is so interesting because I have my buddy Barton. I don't know if you know, What's Barton's last name?
Scott.
Barton Scott. Yeah, he has upgraded formulas, I think it's called. Yeah,
Yes,
upgraded formulas. So he does like nano minerals and he does hair testing for minerals. And he mentioned something last year. We did like an Instagram live talking about, just immunity and things that we can do, and how, certain things that we, whether it's minerals or like for example, something like a iodine, where you take iodine and, it may not be antiviral. I think iodine might be antiviral. I know that some of them are antimicrobial, and it's like this indirect help to your immune system because you're clearing the queue and giving yourself some more bandwidth to handle this other stuff. But, when you mention this, it reminds me of the opposite. It's like you are, just gumming up the works. And then, when it really matters, that's when, you have, for example, if you get like a virus like the one that's out right now, it could affect you even worse. I wonder, I had another question, but I'd rather ask you this one because it seems just so relevant. Have you looked into any possible, I know it's so new, but I mean, we can look at SARS-CoV-1 and maybe any link anywhere in the last 20 years with these types of viruses and how like a high oxalate diet. I don't see the money in the research, obviously, because no one wants to pay for it, but I'm going to ask anyways.
Well, there's a very long standing relationship between all kinds of infection and oxalate. Now, there's really only two things that really make you sick: toxicity and deficiency. The infection is the third party that takes advantage of toxicity and deficiency. So if you got nutrient deficiencies, which we all do, that's the truth of things, and you have toxicity, which we all do, and oxalate is like this very intimate toxin. It's coming in day after day, all the time, in pretty high doses because we're choosing almonds, chocolate, and spinach, and peanuts and potatoes and potato chips and stuff like that, and French fries and tater tots and more potatoes and more peanut butter, and it's everywhere. I mean, you can't get through Halloween without Reese's cups. That combination of chocolate and peanut butter is everywhere, whether you're a junk food eater or
it's always been my favorite too. It's the worst.
Yep.
Right?
That's Danny's.
So it's a very intimate problem with the toxicity and the deficiency. So when those are going on, then you have this metabolic stress that turns on because your mitochondria aren't happy because there's this toxicity and deficiency, and you end up with metabolic syndromes and insulin resistance and diabetes. All of this situation where the body basically becomes this sort of oxidative storm because of this lack and this challenge of the toxins that are mucking up the really intimate works way down there in the cells. Perfect opportunity for infection to come in. You can even see it in the garden. I'm a gardener, and we have lots of herbicide damage out and around here. There's a lot of people who like to spray these liquid herbicides that contain 2,4-D, which is from Agent Orange from the Vietnam era, and Roundup, and the combinations of all kinds of stuff, carfentrazone and Medicaprop, and just all this is like you can just go down to Lowe's and buy it. And all the commercial properties around here use a lot of it. So you see a lot of this damage on the plants where the leaves aren't right. And every time you see the damage, you also see insect holes in the leaves. Because the plant that's been made toxic, and it's interrupted its growth cycle, and the cells are struggling, are now vulnerable to predation, which is a secondary thing. So a lot of this our vulnerability to infection is really taking advantage of the weakness that the toxicity and deficiency that's so standard now is setting us up for. Now, when it comes to oxalates, what you see is chronic UTIs, urinary tract infections, is a classic known clinical symptom that goes with this. You also see infections related to kidney stones. And when oxalate invites the immune system to form these granulomas, and granuloma diseases end up like sarcoidosis and Crohn's disease and things like that, that's another area where infection will take advantage of that problem. And so infections attack or attach themselves to these crystals that are now granuloma disease. This is like having asbestosis, where asbestos is causing an immune reaction. It's the same toxicity with the oxalate particles that end up accumulating in our body because even though we're not absorbing the crystals as crystals, we're absorbing oxalic acid, which then takes calcium and magnesium from your blood and your cells and starts forming crystals. And then the crystals get lodged in these tissues that have injury or cells that are regenerating. That's mostly where the crystals get stuck. So every day you wear out a few cells and they have to regenerate overnight. And those are the areas where you have the wear and tear, where you're going to start developing crystal accumulation and eventually end your career as a gardener or an athlete or whatever, because those same tendons, joints, and muscles that you're using for your activity during the day are vulnerable to being places where oxalate gets hung up in the body. And then because of this enzyme interference and interference with connective tissue regeneration and cell replication, because when the cells have low energy, they don't produce enough protein to duplicate their cells quickly enough. So instead, fibrotic tissues start to develop and you start replacing normal tissue with scar tissue. And you end up with these kind of gnarly joints that need to be replaced later. If you didn't have oxalate in the way and you had the right nutrition, you would just recover from your day-to-day wear and tear. But what's happening is you're wearing yourself out because you don't have enough going on with your toxicity levels and nutrition levels at the cell level to maintain proper tissue maintenance.
My love, I really want to ask her this question.
Yeah, do it.
Okay, it's like I got you here and I think of all these things. Yeah, I think of, well, viruses seem to be a lot of the time kind of a very important part of the detox process. You're exposed to.
Yeah, same with oxalates.
Oh, yeah. So I was wondering, for me, I've really, it's so weird that I have to choose my words wisely, but I know I do because if you Google the word terrain theory, what you get is right away they don't call it. They call it something else. They call it. They have and I don't know if you've ever heard of or looked into any of the terrain theory stuff, but I think that it tends to have make a lot of sense where your environment is the same thing that you're talking about with oxalates. Like it's leading to a lot of these opportunistic things. Right. And so I don't know. Have you thought about that at all, or have you looked into terrain theory?
I'm a big believer in the body as an ecosystem, and that when you have a polluted ecosystem, it breaks down the health and the vitality of it. The kind of ecosystems have these redundant systems. Like when your enzymes start breaking down because oxalate's blocking them, the cells have these other ways of getting around the thing and can do these other backbends and things, and that creates some side effects, but it keeps you going, so you don't notice that the ecosystem has been damaged by these issues. And on the surface, everything looks fine. But underneath there's hidden stress and less ability to cope with things like infectious agents and so on. So I've as a nutrition person and a holistic healing expert, I've always believed that, it's about biological terrain. Biology succeeds. Life's whole purpose is to generate itself. And life is working towards that and has this magical complexity that makes it work. And we keep trying to dumb it down to A causes B.
Yes.
And that's not
I
how
hate that.
nature works.
That's not how it works.
Just look at a cell. I mean, look at one cell, and that's all I feel like you need to know when you see how complex one cell is. Yeah. And for you to say, sir, you have high cholesterol, we're going to give you a statin. It's just like, golly, it's going back to what we were talking about before we got on. I feel like we used to be smarter, but anyways.
Well, we did be smarter. And unfortunately our thinking has gotten corrupted by, affluence and the desire to be at a certain place socially. I mean, you would think the toxicologists would have been involved in medicine and nutrition and say, we should be thinking about natural toxins in terms of nutrition and cell function. But how do you get a job doing that? The jobs in toxicology are with pharmaceutical companies. So, there is not as many career opportunities over there. So just those kinds of things totally influence the science, the mindset, and what gets the money and attention. And it's not that it's an agenda. It's just that the way we structure who gets paid what is based on someone's paying the bills, and it's some product that ends up producing income, and that's ultimately where the attention flows. And I think, back in the old days, before we over professionalized everything and you always had a certain license and all this stuff, people in science were really sharp people who were truly in their heart and mind engaged in the query, what's going on, and able to generate an honest answer. Versus now, you don't get to do honest answers.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah. It was the question that drove them, not the answer.
Not the answer.
It was the question, not the answer, driving them, and not necessarily the paycheck either.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. It's happening on every side because, unfortunately, for me to get a grant, I got to be original. And so everybody is in their own little hyper specialized area. And so there's no real way for them to communicate with each other saying like, hey, I'm in this adjacent field and I'm seeing this. I wonder what you think about that. And, so-and-so is like, well, I'm studying, cell cultures for this one thing, and that's all I do. So, and that's all I get paid for. So anyways, that's
another discussion we can have, about the difficulty to really come up with science that's working for us now. And the need is so great to have better thinking. So it's a real important philosophical issue that's worth exploring.
And these are the questions that we think about all the time. These are the ones that really we're always talking about and thinking about.
Yeah, because it's real. These are huge obstacles to helping, sort of have the scales falling from our eyes. So we're less caught up in that energy of, okay, we're going to put the money and attention over here. And it's not about what's the best thing for humanity. It's just more short-term thinking that's allowing that to be the priority.
I'm sure I'm not the first or even the billionth person to think this, but I see such a different world is so within our grasp. And for some reason, we can't get out of this way of thinking. And I hope that the collective consciousness somehow, gets rattled enough to where they can say, hey, we would get a lot more out of life if we lived this certain way and we thought about things a little bit differently. So I don't know. I don't know.
I think obviously not as many as we would like, but I do definitely think that with everything that's happened over the last year, there are definitely, even with just in my own group of peers and friends that have had the scales removed from their eyes on certain things. So sometimes things do, I guess, have to get a little difficult for, pain. Pain is a great teacher.
Pain's a great teacher. Yeah. That's what had to teach me. Mm-hmm. I had to collapse into complete disability to see this. Yeah. And I had clues earlier and couldn't get it because I already knew what I knew, which was that's blocking discovery and blocking an honest assessment of opportunities that are coming our way, opportunities to make things better.
Yeah. I told Sally when we were on the phone earlier about John Taylor Gatto's quote about
so
I wouldn't say that every university educated person is dumb, but most of them are something like that because it's it's this cycle of who can regurgitate this info the best. Of course,
it's going to be down to
then
the
they become the professors, and so just honest.
Hey, you made it out.
Curiosity.
You have a nice little Ivy League education there. You came out.
Yeah, I will say that whenever I did go against the grain, which I was encouraged to do from the minute I got there
in college,
because I studied political. Yeah, I studied political science, which is hilarious because I'm a complete political atheist now. And but back then it actually interested me. Now I'm just there's absolutely nothing to be won in this, and I'd rather just
pretend like it doesn't exist.
Yeah, just live adjacent. Just be hey, look, they don't bother the Amish people or the Mennonites.
Amish people they've got to go.
They're way ahead of it.
They're
way ahead of the game. So let me bring us back to Earth because I did want to get into. I mentioned to you, I had some hope, and then Sally crushed me. I was like, what about Well, I was just like, what about fermentation? Like if we ferment the food, and she was like, oh, actually that could make it worse. So why don't you talk a little bit about like fermenting, high oxalate foods? And
yeah, that's actually interesting.
Because I taught the kids yesterday at our local homeschool co-op, and I, taught them to ferment some foods, and some of them were high oxalates. Like there were some carrots, there was cabbage, there was
Is cabbage high oxalate?
No, cabbage isn't, but carrots are, right?
Yeah, but if you're just like throwing some carrots into the sauerkraut, you're good.
Right.
It's a small enough
it's just
amount.
like not eating a carrot slaw every
Yeah,
single day.
garlic.
Straight carrots are
herbs.
probably a little high. But fermented vegetables like sauerkraut, they're meant to be eaten in small amounts anyway. And fermentation will reduce somewhat in some foods, but there's a whole bunch of foods like the cabbage family that are very low in oxalate, and fermenting them makes no difference. They're already really low, and it probably lowers it a little bit more, maybe. I think there's not been enough research on that, but they have studied high oxalate greens, various ones from all over the world, and things like poi in Hawaii and so on. And there's a reduction of maybe 20 to 30%. The problem being is that those foods are so ridiculously high. 20 and 30% reduction is meaningless. It's still ridiculously high. And fermentation often releases oxalate crystals into oxalic acid, which is the form that gets into your blood. So that's worse. If you got to eat one, if you got to eat the crystals or the acid, go with the crystals. And so an example of high crystal food would be cinnamon bark. Cinnamon is a bark, and trees put these big blocky crystals in their bark. So the oxalate in cinnamon is blocky crystals, whereas the oxalate in turmeric is oxalic acid, very bioavailable, gets right in there.
Gotcha. Yeah. It reminds me of, there was a professor, I don't know if you heard about her. She was working with mercury, and she had her glove on, and it was a bioavailable form of mercury. So it was like she dropped 2 drops from the pipette on her glove, and she immediately, like a few days later, started to exhibit some serious neurological issues, and it got worse and worse. And they had her blood volume, the amount of mercury in her blood was not high, but because it was like this bioavailable form, like it was lipophilic, so it was getting into her fat, and so she had
in her brain, which
set
is
up
mostly
shop.
fat.
Yeah, it had set up shop, and she had all types of crazy issues. So,
Wow.
that
the
makes
myelin
sense.
around a nerve is a fatty type, substance. And so the myelin is this insulation sheath around many of the nerves. And so that fatty substance would be a great place for that kind of toxin to hang out. And that's where you get the neurotoxicity, right? It starts messing up the nerve function. Yeah, I remember as a kid, we used to always have mercury thermometers, and occasionally they would break and see the little balls of mercury rolling around on the floor. I can't remember if we were touching and playing with it, but my mother would say, look at how mercury balls up, and use it like a fun toy.
Oh my goodness. Wow.
It's crazy. It's
That
like
is so
there's so many things that we were like back then, like the Wild West. But
I
then
have friends
it's, like,
who used
funny.
to run down the street behind the fogging machine for killing the mosquitoes.
Oh, what is that called
to
again?
run in the fogging
Oh my gosh.
down the country
Yeah, what were
road.
those called? DDT?
Yeah.
DDT.
Oh my gosh, DDT was the worst.
DDT.
Yeah, that was a bad one.
Oh yeah.
What did
I
there was
saw-
there was a jingle, right?
I shared, I don't know, recently. It was like an old cigarette ad with a pregnant lady. It was like, expectant mothers love this brand. And I'm like, oh my gosh.
Yeah, that's like it was a jingle. It's like
Wild.
no bugs on me because of DDT or something like that.
Oh yeah, I remember that.
And I have
One
friends
and-
my age who used to run behind the trucks. One of them who had cancer, about,
Wow.
what is it, about 10 years ago, she got cancer. Yeah. And, and lots of things cause cancer, including oxalates, apparently. According to the literature, all this mucking up of your mitochondria and your energy metabolism and your ability to take care of your tissues turns into cancer. Big surprise. I mean, oxalate can mess up your genetic expression too, and actually turns the cells in your vascular system into bone producing cells. Like it turns on the wrong program in those cells. And that's how you get calcified arteries with high oxalate.
Wow. That's wild.
Yeah, I mean, we're right down there in the intimate stuff of a cell is not a good place to be. And oxalate has this tininess and this reactivity and this electromagnetic power and this ion mineral grabbing thing that starts mucking up the works way down there at the most intimate spot in your cells. That blows up into systemic problems over time. So downing it in smoothies and keto bread might seem like it's working in the short run, but unfortunately, I have the mixed blessing of working with people who are very sick post keto, very sick post paleo, very sick post virgin diet, very sick post you name it, all of those things. It seemed okay for a little while, but usually it works for a few months or a couple years, and then things start getting worse. But you don't blame the diet because you're doing everything right. So you keep doing it for 6 years and drive your health into the ground. So it's a tragic situation that we're ignoring oxalate, and there's no reason to ignore oxalate. There's plenty of science. It's been known for a long, long time to be a problem. We've known for almost 100 years that spinach provides you no calcium whatsoever because it's so high in oxalate, and yet people continue to pretend there's calcium in spinach.
Yes, they do. Oh my goodness. Well, I'm actually, well, our audience will also be interested in this. You know, we are very active just as a family, and we have a lot of, followers who are very into fitness. And one thing we really focus on is proper recovery. And so, I'm curious, how can eating a high oxalate diet impact our recovery?
Yeah, so we touched on it a little bit before that most of your recovery processes, your tissue regeneration processes, you're building up your muscles, you really want that downtime so your metabolism can take advantage of the stress of a good workout. You're not going to build muscle cells if you don't give your muscles time to build the cells. And a lot of that activity is happening overnight while you're sleeping. And unfortunately, if you have a high oxalate diet, that's when your blood levels are the highest, right? So there's a delay. So if you had lunch at noon and had a high oxalate meal, your highest peak would be around 4 in the afternoon. And then you eat dinner at 6, you're still trying to clear that high oxalate lunch. Dinner, you have a dinner like I used to have with sweet potatoes and Swiss chard on the plate. And then by the time you go to bed, there's 10 o'clock bedtime, and you have a whole day of oxalate in your blood, and now dinner is just topping that. You're at your highest level of oxalate in your blood at bedtime. And you spend the whole night clearing out the oxalate and dealing with that mess, and it diverts cell energy for that. And you could be, in the meantime, influencing cells' energy levels, ability to produce protein, and ability to reproduce. And I think that's why I had this foot problem since I was 19 that I kind of finally resolved by the time I was like 28. But it was a terrible decade of crutches and you name it. I got married in sneakers and had to sit on a stool because my feet were so bad. And then I spent the next 30 years with feet that were kind of and where I couldn't go barefoot ever. I couldn't even stand at the kitchen sink without shoes on because I needed side support. The connective tissue in my feet was never sturdy enough to take a lot of impact or wear heels. And so that tissue recovery never really finished until I got on a low oxalate diet. And then 6 months later, my feet are fine. Fine. And so that was huge for me. I was like, are you kidding? The thing that has so ruined so many hopes and dreams in my life and kept me from having a chance to be athletic. And that's why I gravitated to yoga, which is a no impact kind of thing where you don't need to pound your feet in the ground to do yoga. So that and swimming, but of course the chemicals in the pool, I couldn't keep that up forever because that didn't work either. When you're toxic, soaking in the pool is not going to help you. And I highly discourage people if you're really toxic with oxalate, don't get back in the swimming pool, especially if you're changing your diet, because not only are you not healing your tissues at night, and not only does this have a real effect on, are you really going to rebuild your muscles after you worked out, even though you're doing recovery days, if you're recovering on spinach smoothies? Maybe not. And your tendons. I mean, the big thing with oxalate is arthritis and gout, joint degeneration, bone degeneration, and it ends up weakening tendons. And it also, because your kidneys are so stressed with a constant traffic of oxalate having come through the kidneys beyond what they're designed to handle, they put out more and more of these proteins to prevent that from becoming kidney stones, which works for a lot of us. But those extra proteins can cause other problems that lead to fibromyalgia, lead to cancer, and so on. So that there's like these side effects of coping that add more problems to your metabolism. And all those kinds of stressors, how are you going to build sturdy tissues and keep them well and stay hardy through the years if you've got all this metabolic stress going on?
Yeah. Now, can you just, I've heard you talk about this before, but just in case our audience hasn't, because so I'm the type of person, like I learned something and first it's like, I'm sure a lot of people are this way. I'm like, oh my gosh, throw out everything in the house. And then, that's just how it is. And like, I remember specifically about 2 years ago when I first like really started listening to you, I was doing some experimentation with carbs in the summer, and there was a squash or two that I remember reading that was it was on the low oxalate list. Are there any squash variations that are low oxalate?
Pretty much the whole squash family is pretty good. Yeah.
Okay.
They're all pretty low oxalate. I usually recommend, like with cucumbers as a type of squash, peel them and seed them, because there are indigestible stuff in plants that isn't just oxalate, the lectins and a whole bunch of other junk. And so seeds and skin are heavily protected tissues, so they're not real digestible. But squash is, I personally like the spaghetti squash is the most digestible one. The tastiest one is probably butternut squash, and very versatile. You can do a lot with it. So yeah, squash is good. Interesting though, squash has this ability to hybridize in ways that produces this evil squash toxin, so you make sure if you're growing your own squash that you buy legitimate seeds and get a legitimate variety. And if squash tastes nasty to you, throw it out, because that whole family has this ability to make this, I forget what it's called, but it can be, like a gourd is considered really toxic. A gourd is kind of a type of squash. So the plants are fascinating. You start studying the sort of botany of your diet, and it's like, wow, there's a lot going on there.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of people, at the very least, should have their eyes open that these things. I think Georgia E did the best job of that when I first, Little Shop of Horrors. I'll never forget. It's probably like 10 years old or something like that, and I was just like, she's right. Plants are not my friends. I was trying to like check the box. I'm like, I don't like plants. I love meat. That's what I love to eat the most. I mean, granted, at the time, most of my life, it was slathered in some sort of barbecue sauce or something. But, when I really learned about it, it was like, okay, I can eat this without the sugar on it. But yeah, the one thing that I did want you to, kind of mention to people, because if they're like me, they're going to just be like, gung ho about it. And, I just imagine this person, eating 3 to 4 different things that are really high oxalate and then cutting them out. And so can you just talk about real quick, like what are the things that can happen if you cut it out too quickly, and what would be like the smarter approach?
Right. So since we don't really know how toxic you are with oxalates, there's no way to measure your tissues effectively, blood, urine, or whatever. There's really not a good way to assess if you've got a lot of buildup of oxalate, other than just thinking about the history of your diet. And have you always been into tea and certain high oxalate foods? And you can check, I've got lists, and there's lists out there, but you can check for the high oxalate foods. And if they've been in one form or another, usually they change over the years. Like when I was a kid, it was rhubarb and tea and liking vegetables. But so if you have this history, then you really need to imagine that you're probably have this crystalline dust building up in your thyroid gland and your brain and your bones and your marrow and so on. And so when the body doesn't like that, like that's all pollution. This is definitely a terrain that's messed up, right? So the minute you give it a chance, it takes only about 5 days, sometimes 10 days, for the cells to go, oh, okay, it's winter. We're not eating all this blackberries and spinach anymore. We're just going to go with the ham and steak, because that would have been a historical norm where you would at least have some months of the year where you ate very few of these plant foods, especially if you were poor. You had your pig out back and you had ham and maybe some biscuits, but you weren't eating spinach and blackberries all the time. So the body would normally clean this out at least annually. But now what we're proposing with modern people, you stop eating oxalate and the body wants to clean out this junk. And if you do that abruptly, the body reacts more strongly in an effort to clean out a bunch of toxic dump sites, millions and billions of little tiny invisible toxic dump sites. And if it releases them back into your bloodstream, That's toxic. It's like being freshly acutely poisoned with oxalic acid because you're releasing it from your tissues. You don't want to do that. So take a chill pill and look at your top whatever oxalate foods and just pick one at a time to find something else to eat. So instead of spinach, find some arugula, some other green thing. If you like to have greens in your diet, which I don't think is absolutely essential like we're told it is. But if you like them and need them for whatever reason, there are plenty of other choices. So learn to swap them out one at a time. Learn more about this if you're seriously going to stick with it. Because once you start clearing oxalate from the tissue, sometimes there's a little momentum in that doesn't seem to let go. So if you've been low oxalate for a while just to play with it, and then you get invited to a birthday party and someone hands you keto chocolate almond fudge cake, and you go ahead and have a slice of that, but your system is high in oxalic acid because you're clearing it, so you're already high in the bloodstream and the kidneys, and then you add more from the diet, you can push yourself into such toxic mayhem that the body loses its ability to contain and control the release of oxalate, and it might even make you, for a longer period, sicker, more sick and harder sick. So literally, if you're high in oxalate, it is possible to trigger a kind of internal toxic crisis, and because the process can be kind of over enthusiastic, like the body is so ready to have it gone. So I do recommend that you learn a little bit, and choose to do it in an adult way where you plan to stick with it and not play with it, because you could be playing with your health in ways that there isn't a doctor there that's going to help you realize when you end up in the ER with heart palpitations and blood pressure out of control that you're having an electrolyte crisis because you're dumping oxalic acid right now out of your tissues into your blood, which can cause arrhythmias and difficulty control. When there's a lot of oxalate around, it is messing with your electrolyte control, and that messes with control of basic functions like blood pressure, heart rate, and so on. And it can be scary.
Yeah, that's I mean, the electric side of things too. That's another thing that I've been looking into. Actually, electric and like sound and how that impacts things. I'm just fascinated by sound and how sound can heal. Sound can do a lot of things. It's really cool stuff.
It is. I found like doing chanting can clear your head of sinus congestion. Like the chanting,
I believe
you're
it.
going to do that. It's a vibration that actually helps clear your head. It's really good little way to head clear without drugs. Because the sound is an energy of vibration, right? So you're generating that vibration right in the tissues of your head because your voice box is right here. So that's probably a sort of untapped avenue for self-care.
You know, I read, remember I told you I've been reading about like that time period of like the 1840s to the early 1900s. And there used to exist sound healing clinics where I believe that it's like a lost art, and, you know, where it doesn't make a lot of sense right now because it's one of those things.
We're so out of touch with that in general,
Yeah.
I think.
So what did they do in those clinics? What kind of?
I think it was different frequencies. I mean, like with for example, with sound, you can build stuff. I mean, I don't know if you've ever heard of cymatics, but that is something where you can like you now that we know how to measure sound visually, it's amazing to see what sound can do. The most beautiful, gorgeous geometric patterns that you've ever seen that are very similar to the architecture that we talk about with this, what they call neoclassical, which is hilarious because we don't ever do that anymore. And you think to yourself, like, how did these buildings, why would they do this? And I believe that there was a function. There was some sort of function that we don't know about, and that we've lost somehow, that's been somehow occulted from us. But like, I don't know. It's like one of those things where you find like old ads and old things with a menu, like to see like this, you know, the different things. Nowadays, I feel like we get this watered down version where it says, well, this amount of hertz is going to give you, it's going to help you release all of your worries and all this. And then, you know, then we get into the pseudoscience stuff. And then it's just like
we're pretending we know more than we do.
Yeah, yeah. And it's like, well, I don't have science because this is ancient wisdom. And I'm like, well, I just believe in natural law. And I think that anything that can be observed in nature is gonna be valid. And if you can't give me a reason or a mechanism of action, then I'm sorry, I'm not gonna believe your little thing that you're talking about. But yeah,
Well,
anyways,
sound is pretty easy to validate. I mean, why do we gravitate to music? Why do we want to do music when we're celebrating and when we're relaxing? And why is music so therapeutic for a teenager where they have to listen to it all the time? And, why do we love singing in church? Because the act of singing and producing sound is healthy.
Yeah,
it is.
yeah, and the vibrations that you talk about, it's
too,
these this vibrations. Like even like I saw one where they were saying different prayers, and it was like it wasn't any specific sound, but I guess it was the tone of voice that did it for, that they looked at what it did to water, and what it did to certain plants and things like that, and it was just like.
Are you talking about like those people who sing to plants?
Well,
I've seen those experiments where they'll take like a plant and they will literally sing to it and it does better.
Yes.
That is so wild.
I mean, come on.
It's
these
some
are
kind
things
of
like,
energy exchange, isn't it?
Yeah, it's totally.
Yeah. And I know that
absolutely.
I really do think that the sound and somehow the electricity are also related. Because when you start playing with sound waves and water, now you're talking about maybe there's some sort of way to tap into some ethereal energy that we may have had access to before. I don't know. This is all like just thoughts that I'm just like, wow, what if,
Yeah.
Well, and even just breathing right. The breath is so powerful because it's the seat of both automatic functions where you're going to breathe whether you think about it or not. You don't stop breathing when you're sleeping, but you're certainly not trying to breathe. But if you want to take over, you're allowed to jump in and take over and control your breath. So this is this lovely place where your nervous system that's just doing it all for you, the real smart part of your nervous system. And then there's the frontal cortex who can jump in and play with that. And where those two places meet is very powerful for calming the nervous system.
Well, that's one of the things I told the kids yesterday. I said, this part is really important. I said, let's hyperventilate. And we did. And then I asked them, how did that feel? And everybody was like, well, it's kind of uncomfortable. And it's kind of, and I said, well, now every time your brother makes you mad or, something happens to where because, I told them a lot of you are at a place in your lives where you don't have the right equipment to deal with these feelings.
Yeah.
So you kind of have to do these things to override your equipment because their frontal cortexes are just like very underdeveloped.
Oh, yeah.
So I said, if there's one thing that we walk away with today is that if you're feeling bad and you're feeling down, you can do this box breathing thing that we did some box breathing. And, you may still be sad if it's something that really made you sad, but you might find that you feel just a little bit better.
Yeah.
And if it's something that you can practice on a large scale, you talk about how maybe your body will be better wired to stay in parasympathetic versus, this consistent drifting towards sympathetic all the time, that it's only going to get worse as they get older and more neurotic. So,
I think really teaching healthy self-calming versus a sort of neurotic soothing that people do with their food and their obsessions and even tics that you develop is, so really more a central relationship with yourself. But I think to me that what I gravitate to when I hear you say this, I think about how in any moment, no matter how bad that moment seems to be, there's some little way you could make it better, at least for yourself. You could choose a breath, a sound, a choice, or a thought, or a small action where that tough situation could just be a little easier.
I totally agree with that. I mean, and it goes back to like, a lot of the reality that we experience, we have a lot more choice in it than we think we do. And, we can change our reality pretty quickly if we just are intentional.
The difficulty is the fear gets in the way. It's a normal human response to anything unsure, unknown, in any place where we're not sure we're going to belong or be accepted or approved of. There's fear shows up pretty quick. And in order to stay out of fear, I think you have to have a mature relationship with yourself, or, not let fear take over your life. You have to have a certain kind of compassionate, caring, and decent relationship with yourself, and not be constantly too hard on yourself all the time.
Totally.
I agree.
Well, I love where this conversation went.
Yes. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
This is great.
Let's, why don't you ask?
Oh,
'Cause I've been hogging all
That's
of this.
okay.
I'm sorry. I just it's
I'll
been
listen.
really interesting to talk to her.
I love it. So thank you so much for coming on. We had such a great conversation. Where can people find you online? And then also, we would love if you shared anything that you're working on that you would like to share with our audience, any way we can support you.
Well, thank you so much. I'm online. I'm sallyknorton.com. There's a lot of free information on my website. There's a little shop there where you can get some documents. Many are free. There's a cookbook there for people, and there's a lot of vegetable recipes in that cookbook. That's a for sale PDF document with like 180 something recipes in it. And I'm finishing up my book manuscript, so that should be coming out maybe early next year. I don't really have a date yet, but by next year we'll have a book that will help make sense of all this. And I'm working on some testimonial videos that will be coming out, and Danny's going to hook me up with an editor, so that'll help him happen.
Oh, that's great. Yes.
Yes.
And eventually I'm going to have a whole series for providers and healthcare advisors who really want to learn this so that they can really help people. So that'll be exciting.
You totally need that, because remember that person that shows up in the ER that you mentioned with those electrical issues, and they're like, I know what this is. I just had a bunch of oxalates, and they're gonna be like, what?
This is exactly what happened. I mean, I've had people try to tell the emergency room that this is my oxalate situation, and they're like, yeah, right. And they really need some potassium, but they don't really, even though they have T-wave inversion. So yeah, because we do need to rely on healthcare providers, no matter what variety you're going to. It would really be nice to have them on board. So we're reaching for that.
Okay, so real quick, I don't know what T-wave inversion is, but I do know that, hyperkalemia is like a major concern with people with, electrical issues. So just explain that really quick, because I'm interested.
It's sort of a crash of electrolytes where the blood really doesn't have enough of the ions it's supposed to have. So you're kind of too little potassium and sodium and so on. There's, calcium's one of the electrolytes. It's when because the oxalate's causing a lot of spilling of electrolytes, and potassium, for example, is only in muscles and bones. It shouldn't be in the blood. And when it's really low in the blood, that's really weird, because the blood is always low, and it should be low. But if it's even lower than that, that's because your kidneys have had to clear it, and there's not enough left to give. You start using up your bones to keep your blood right and keep your pH right when you have this. Some of this metabolic stuff we talked about creates acidity, and so there's a lot going on back there. But when we see this fairly much with people who have done these years of high oxalate foods and now are trying to clear it, where they have this electrolyte problems, and sometimes it looks like they're having a stroke or things like that.
Got it. Okay. Thank you, Sally. Well, Sally, we just had a blast, and this won't be the last time. When that book comes out, please come back so we can talk all about it, and I know I'll be reading it.
Excellent. I'm looking forward to next time. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you.
Appreciate it.